hold attention thing, Mark, that might be the string I'm trying to pull on here. 'Cause you've said that attention is now a vital commodity in today's economy. I just want you to unpack that for me, because when I hear we got attention, I'm thinking top of the funnel, and I'm like, you got an impression, you got a view. So what? Why is attention something so important, something that we as PR pros should be paying attention to?
Well, there's been quite a lot written about attention as a commodity, and I think it's actually, but it's not something that's talked about a lot in the PR sector, but I think it's quite a useful framing for it, a good way for us to think about it. Some people make parallels between attention and something like labor. So, for instance, in the Industrial Revolution, prior to the Industrial Revolution, labor was just something that people did. It wasn't necessarily something that they thought of as a method of exchange, if you like. And then what happens in the Industrial Revolution is you get commoditization of labor, and you get the institutions that sort of mediate that, if you like. And so labor then becomes something which we possess as part of a big mass of labor that might exist in the entire population. Obviously, this is something that people like Marx write a lot about. And then obviously as individuals, we possess a small amount of labor, a small amount of that resource. I think that, and I'm not the first person to say this, there are some really interesting books on this, which I can refer you to for the reading afterwards. But I think that there's now a sort of a way of thinking about attention in the same way, which is that if you think about it, attention is as a resource, if you like. It's something that is finite, and it's something that can be monetized. And in a way, if you look at the history of attention as a resource, or as the economy of attention, if you like, it actually really mirrors and tracks the history of advertising itself. So the first sort of concept in advertising was this idea, I think it was in the New York Sun, that you could, rather than trying to marketize the giving of information through a newspaper, the best thing to actually do to make money, the innovation was that actually you should market the attention that people pay to that information, and that is the birth of advertising itself. What we've seen then more recently in the last 20 years is, I think in the PR sector, we like to talk about advertising being in decline. But of course, advertising is in massively rude health. But what's happened is that the business model of advertising has been taken in large part from the advertising sector into the technology sector. So what you see is technology companies that come along, and they become the experts in the marketization of attention. And the way that the technology companies think about attention, people like Google, literally is as a resource. It's a resource that's finite, and it's a resource that we constantly need to tap. And as there is an abundance of information, again, this isn't my quote, I think it's Herbert Smith, abundance of information leads to a scarcity of attention. So it does operate exactly like a market, and we should think of attention almost as an economic fact, if you like. And that's a really helpful way, I think, to think about public relations.
That's really interesting. So looking at attention in the lens of as a currency of sorts. Now, growing up, God, when I was a teenager, 30 odd years ago, and life was pretty boring, like I would just be watching TV, and there was a few channels, and, if I take the tube, I was so bored, I would just be looking at the adverts in order to just have something to do, something to read whilst I'm on the tube. And now, of course, I don't even look at the adverts half the time on the tube. I don't tune into TV. I go straight to streaming. I pay the extra, 20% to cut out the ads. So what does that mean now for brands? Because they have to work so much harder today, because they're not just competing with other brands, they're actually competing with what's coming through on our phones, politics, entertainment. They're competing because all of a sudden we have everything at our fingertips. It's such a different world to the world that we grew up in. So what sort of advice would you give to brands to recalibrate their strategies? I mean, what have you seen that they've been doing? Because, of course, this wasn't like a binary thing. This has been happening over the last couple of decades. So what have you seen brands doing other than moving into the technology space and really sort of swapping the billboards perhaps for, Google search or whatever? But what strategies do you sort of advise them on when the competition is literally everything?
Well, I think, I'll address your first point first. I think you're absolutely right. The difference between now and 20 years ago is that when you put content into the public space, you are literally competing with the entire history of human content. And that was simply just not the case 20 years ago. And that's what we talk about, this idea of the sort of the abundance of attention means that, that competition is as fierce as it's ever been. And I think what that's done in the marketing sector really is, as some of the business model of advertising has become slightly undermined. So, for instance, the making of money from production or the making of money from a commission on media, that business model really has been taken by the tech companies. You've then seen a blurring of the boundaries between traditional disciplines within marketing and PR agencies starting to look a bit more like advertising agencies and vice versa. And what you're seeing there really is all these disciplines competing in one market, and that is the market for attention. And that's really the space that we're all playing things out in. In terms of how then that applies to brands, well, in a sense, I think we need to become what I'd term attention entrepreneurs, if you like. So we need to be able to think creatively and innovatively, both about medium and message. So it's making sure that you've got people who are native to and understand the grammar of specific media. And that, in the last few years, you've seen, I think, the growth of short form video, algorithmic video, and that requires a sort of visual literacy. Obviously, in the previous period, I think with Facebook and Twitter, what you saw was a much more textual form, but a compressed textual form. Now you're seeing the rise of podcasts, which I think are giving more of a space for discursive analysis in and around ideas. But what you're seeing there is lots of different media that are emerging and out of innovation and out of digital change. And what you need to have is literacy within those media. Then in terms of the advice that I would give to PR people, well, certainly in terms of the brands and the marketing communications side of things, is that you need to approach things as an attention entrepreneur, not someone who is tied to a specific medium, but who might understand what would work on any medium that exists, and this would apply to advertising too, and understanding that the currency is ideas. Earning attention is a lot more efficient than buying attention, and that is becoming increasingly true. As there is more and more information in the public sphere, the amount of attention you can buy simply is less and less for your buck. So earning attention and earned media itself can and should in that sense be seen as something that is truly strategic, because it gives you a comparative advantage. And so I would say to PR people, first of all, you need to think of yourselves as attention entrepreneurs. And secondly, think of yourselves in competition with all of those other things that are seeking attention, be they paid, owned or earned.
I like that. And I like to look at politics as a bit of a lesson for us in PR, especially big election campaigns. And the US election last year, one party had twice as much money as the other party. They were able to generate an awful lot of attention and failed somewhat miserably, losing all three levels of government in the US. It was the Democrats that had the money, and the Republicans, not that they were broke, but didn't have nearly the war chest. Is politics a good theater for us to study as PR pros when it comes to the attention economy, Mark?
Always, and it always has been, not just in terms of the attention economy, but throughout history. I think the two things feed each other. So obviously there are learnings that come from the commercial space and the branding space that come into politics. I think in our present moment, brands probably have more to learn from politicians than the other way around. So I would say, whatever you think of Trump or whatever your political approach is, he is a genius attention entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I think that it's no accident that his background was effectively as a TV producer, because this is the first thing that he understands. He also understands the power of like a mimetic idea. So a big idea which symbolizes something really important. So the building of the wall is the sort of prime example of that on the right. Build that wall. It's not a realistically achievable thing, but it is totemic. It symbolizes something a lot bigger. It says something about, where you stand. You see similar things, I think, on the left in the US, for instance, concepts like the Green New Deal. There are similar things here in the UK as well. That's quite a popular concept that's come across. But I think in politics, what you're seeing is the emergence of one idea. I think you can't really give a policy list or prescriptions which is truly thought through and communicate that easily in this current information space where attention is so scarce and so short.
Do you know, Mark, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's quite interesting, President Trump's background in entertainment and how that has actually, he's leaned into that and understood that a lot of people just don't want that sort of highly scripted politician rhetoric, those sort of generic, speeches that actually at the end of it you're sort of thinking, well, what did he just say, or what did she just, what did she mean? I wanted to lean into a book recommendation, Mark, that you gave me earlier in the year, The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu. And for those who haven't read his book, he is a Columbia Law School professor, and he's explores the history of the attention economy. And he sort of talks about the birth of the attention industry, radio and television's golden age, which is, back when I was a kid. But he talks about something interesting called the psychology of attention and the psychology and persuasion that's used to hijack human attention. And so, do you think that's going to lead, Mark, to a future where we're going to become much more aware of attention and the value of attention? Because I once read this stat that if you are interrupted, it takes about 20 minutes for your brain to go back to its original sort of focus level. And then I thought, oh God, I've got my notifications going off like every 5-10 minutes. And then I thought, my God, my critical thinking must be impaired throughout the entire day. And then once I saw the data and the research, I thought, my God, yes, there's all these wonderful apps, and it sort of almost sets it as standards for these notifications to come as and where. But at what cost? So do you think we're learning about the cost of giving our attention away to our phone? And in due course, we're going to start valuing it as a currency and also start putting safeguards around it. So with my phone, I now have turned off all the notifications, including, for instance, and other than my family sort of, they can get through. But only when I started realizing the cost of my own thinking and how it's impaired by that constant intrusive interruptions.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things Tim Wu talks about, and actually he's talked about in a number of other books as well, is the way that Google developed this concept of sort of behavioral surplus. It's quite interesting how when Google started, they didn't want to advertise. And actually this is, true of so many tech companies. They start off believing that they could sell, say, a good or a service or something like that, in and of itself. But they quickly come to realize that actually the most valuable thing that they can sell is people's attention. And this is where Google were the great pioneers. And obviously all of the big tech companies have been helped by a lack of regulation or a lack of willingness by governments or legislators, I suppose, to intervene or to think of attention in the way it really should be thought of, I think, which is as a public good. So I'll tell you another really good book that I've just been reading that I think is really good, Shoshana Zuboff, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And it's kind of like a sort of treatise on how we've effectively given away our privacy or given away something without necessarily realizing that we have to technology companies, and actually that we should think of attention as actually being a public good in the same way that, say, water or utilities or services are, and actually that our attention as citizens actually ought to be protected. But obviously there are steps that we can take ourselves to do that. And there are also trends that move in that direction. I heard Tim Berners-Lee talking recently, or our creative director Henry actually sort of relayed this to me, talking about the age of intention rather than the age of attention, which is that if we're going to give away our attention, we should give it away with intent. And I actually think that media forms are sort of evolving to do that. And I think podcasts would be a prime example of that, actually. That what you can do is you can command someone's absolute attention through their ears for a really, really long period of time. If you give them something that's really meaningful, you're not necessarily trying to sell them something. And I think that's also affected or changed by the fact that podcasts aren't really algorithmic or managed algorithmic in the same way as other information that you might get through Google and other places. And I think that there's a real appetite for that, and a real appetite for sort of consumer media in that way.
But it's only audio, Mark. Does that hold our attention? Does it need video to complement it? Does it need the written word to complement it at the same time? I want to expand on that.
Not for me, but everyone is different.
Yeah.
I would say possibly for a younger generation who are used to using video, for instance, using YouTube as a source of of gaining information in the same way that I might use Google or a book.
Right.
So I think, generationally, there are differences. Obviously, we also have behavioral differences in between ourselves. So, for instance, I've realized as I've got older that sometimes I'm better at paying attention to auditory media than I am to reading. And, that's an interesting discovery and something that I wasn't necessarily taught in school. But I think in schools and education, they think about that a lot more nowadays. So I would say, whether we need video, is one question. I think there is a need for it broadly as humans, and therefore it will continue to evolve.
And there's that whole idea that if it's only audio, it sparks the theater of the mind, right?
Indeed.
Which is, if you can't hold your own attention, there's a problem.
And that's the power of radio, and that's why everyone was wrong to say that radio was going to die with the advent of television or other things. Media evolves like energy.
No, it's a podcast to kill AM radio, but that's a whole other topic.
It's also very reassuring to see all of these books behind you, Mark, your incredibly full bookshelf and all these books that you've been reading. I must say that I used to read religiously a book a week at least. And I think the last 10 years, I'm ashamed to say that I barely scrape a month. And so, Doug, I don't know about you. I mean, are you still an avid reader? And do you think our attention spans are shot and it's impacting?
I'm right with you.
Yeah, you're the same.
I'm right with you because I'll lose myself in a scroll for half an hour, right? Or if I'm watching the baseball game and there's a commercial, it doesn't hold my attention.
Yeah.
I decide to divert my attention to a meaningless, mind-numbing scroll.
Yeah.
But we're also teaching ourselves to do 3 or 4 different media at once. So you're reading a book, watching television on your phone.
Well, I can multitask, Mark. Others can't.
Yeah.
I can. I'm the exception.
But exactly. Well, that's a lot what I like to think about myself as well. But I do wonder how much attention we can actually pay when we're trying to absorb so many things at the same time.
Do you know, I was
this is just a background from Zoom, by the way.
Oh, is it? Oh,
no, I'm checking. It is real. It is real.
Oh God, you can
I haven't read any of the books though.
Oh God, you can see my sorry pile of books. I need to build them up for the whole visual kudos of background meetings. I was chatting to a client the other day and I was saying, we need to make sort of content a lot shorter. We talk about sort of YouTube videos versus short videos and long film. And the client said, is it true that actually people's attention spans are reduced? Because I still see people binging on, a TV series on Netflix for like 5 hours. So is it that it's not so much the attention is the issue, it's more we have to work much harder to earn the attention, which I thought was
I think, as I say, we need to be attention entrepreneurs, and you're seeing in politics those people emerging and being the most successful. So I'd say from the left, seeing as we're still talking about American politics, and I'm aware that there are other countries' politics that we could talk about. But anyway, let's stay on this subject. If you look at I'd urge PR people to go and look at the Mamdani mayoral campaign in New York, and how actually that was a sort of left populist, although actually I've heard people call it left pluralist in the sense that I don't think he behaves like a typical populist in that he doesn't seem to have a big enemy that he wants to kind of destroy. But his campaign was extremely Trumpian in the sense that what he did was he used big mimetic ideas. So this idea of making shops public, bringing them into the public sector, big ideas, probably not achievable within themselves, but representative of something that sort of underlies them. I think the other thing that's notable about him is there was not a media interview that he didn't do. He was absolutely out there, taking every opportunity that was there, and he wasn't risk averse. And I think what we see in the political class, particularly on the left, because the left tends to argue for, the centre left anyway, tends to argue for incrementalism. It's quite coalitional, so it doesn't like to take risks. The left sees communication as absolutely fraught with risk, and in many ways can be scared by its own shadow. This guy's going out, and whether you agree with everything that he said or not, he's basically going out there and saying, well, look, I don't care if I make a mistake. That's just one news cycle. And as you see that, and he won the primary in New York, and you see that come through. And the other thing that he really did, I think, was to understand the grammar of video content. And that's something that is relatively alien to me.
What do you mean?
Short form TikTok video.
Yeah.
And the videos that he produced were just absolutely sort of stunning. But on top of that, he's a good communicator, and you also need that in politics. And whatever era you're in, you still need to be a good communicator. But that was an example of, I think, someone, because there aren't so many examples, I think, from the left of clever use of this media, and I think that's because the right is is more willing to be reductive as well, and treat things as being quite simple. So anyway, that's an interesting case that people should look at.
Barack Obama was effective in his time for social media. This is a while ago, but yeah, he was.
He was very effective on sort of on TV and in writing
and written word.
Terrible on Twitter. Terrible on Twitter though. He couldn't do compressed. He can't really do compressed. So sort of short form. Although I think we're moving on from short form content as well now, by the way, or short form textual content. Yeah. I'm not on Twitter anymore. Not that means anything, but there's a lot of other people that aren't too.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, as I say, you need to adjust the grammar or the media of your time. I know we're talking a lot about politics here, but I think that this applies to brands as well. In politicians, we're seeing so many politicians. I think here in the UK, we have a government that's absolutely scared of its own shadow. So terrified, so risk averse, so terrified of making a mistake in the communication space, going against a bunch of people who just don't care. Yeah. They don't care what mistakes they make. They will just brush it off and they'll move on from it. I also think that in the brand and in the commercial space, and clearly you're weighing up of risk and the assessment of risk and things like that, the calculus is different because it's different from politics. It's not the same. But in the brand space, I also think we could see more bravery from brands as well. Don't be so risk averse. Be attention entrepreneurs. Roll with the news agenda. Roll with the calendar as things move. Respond to events as they happen. But also, making a mistake is not the end of the world. And I think there is a sense in the big corporate world that any kind of mistake you make, because of the way they operate, especially if they're listed companies, any kind of mistake you make would be absolutely catastrophic. But the really brave, disruptive companies will be the ones that are prepared to say, okay, we want to compete in the attention economy because that is something that is potentially really efficient and strategic.
Agreed. If you don't, you look like all the others and sound like all the others, which makes me think you're rehearsed and not authentic. That's what it comes down to. Mark, really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks both.